Taxes. Despite being one of the biggest headaches for the average citizen, few are aware that this tax obligation, carried by almost everyone, has its roots thousands of years ago in civilizations that have long vanished but laid the foundational stones of our world. In this documentary, we will trace the path paved by those early cultures, which ultimately shaped the tax system we all know. From the first farms in the desolate Mesopotamian landscape, the cradle of cities, to the winding rivers of ancient Egypt, witnessing pharaohs and oppressed slaves. We will journey through the democratic Greek city-states, where philosophers like Aristotle contemplated taxation as a driving force for civic philanthropy, and we will end at the colossus of the Roman Empire, whose fiscal methods dominated the Mediterranean. So, get ready to delve into the intricacies of this unknown tax, past that, unknowingly, formed the substrate upon which our current societies stand, because they say that those who know their history master their future. Let the adventure begin. Chapter 1: Mesopotamia. Thousands of years ago, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, one of the earliest forms of taxation in history emerged. It was the region of Mesopotamia, and its intricate irrigation channels brought life to abundant harvests that sustained the burgeoning cities. However, to manage these complex irrigation systems and ensure the prosperity of the citizens, organization and labor were required. Thus, around 6000 BC, the wisest elders of the region decided to establish a new bond between the land and those who worked it. In return for divine and royal protection, each peasant family would contribute a portion of their harvests each season. In the absence of a monetary system, taxes were paid as a percentage of the crops harvested. And so, the first known tax was born, documented for the first time, on the ancient clay tablets of Lagash. To understand this better, let's go back in time to the now extinct city of Ur in southern Mesopotamia, one of the first urban centers of humanity. Here, the great king was Sulgi, also known as Dondi, who undertook the task of counting all the local gods and building temples for them. Of all these gods, the greatest was Enlil. The state worshipped him in the same location where they kept its treasure, like wheat, animals, and metals. So these things became basically the taxes officially given to Enlil. People carefully wrote down all the payments on clay tablets, and some temples even had real tax records. Because of these taxed crops, they could build big temples and even better irrigation systems. This helped cities grow, and they became even more impressive. So, the not-so-good soil in Mesopotamia didn't just help the first farmers, but also laid the foundation for the earliest world civilizations. That's how taxation started on the Tigris and Euphrates shores, a starting point that changed the course of history for almost all countries in the world many years later. Chapter 2: Egypt. While the first cities were growing in Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq, and the concept of taxation was starting, on the fertile banks of the Nile, parallel developments were unfolding in one of the most organized states of antiquity, legendary Egypt. Around 3100 BC, Egypt, led by its pharaohs, became the first well-organized nation in history. And when you have a central government, you also need a system to support it. So, even before Egypt became one united kingdom, small tax agreements between rulers and farmers began forming in places like Abydos, Nagada, and Hierakonpolis as early as the beginning of the 4th millennium BC. But it would be with the establishment of the Pharaonic Empire that taxes reached their highest level of organization, supported by an elite group of innovative bureaucrats for the time. This way, the tax collection system quickly spread across the vast expanse of the two banks of the mighty Nile. However, in the early days of the Pharaonic Empire, it was the king himself who led the tax collection every 2 years. The king, with the company of his priests and closest advisors, took a risky journey on his royal boat. He traveled from his palace in Abydos in the south to the city of Memphis in the north. This trip, called the Following of Horus, had two goals. It showed that the king was there for his people, like the falcon god Horus. Also, it was a way to gather farmers and check how much livestock and crops they had. However, as the old kingdom strengthened, the royal court settled in cities like Memphis. Gradually, taxes took on an annual nature, no longer tied to the mythical journey of the sovereign along the Nile. Yet this impressive river still held a crucial role, determining the outcome of harvests and, consequently, the amount of tributes to be paid. It all depended on the yearly flood of the river. If it didn't flood enough, fields remained dry, causing problems for farmers, but if it overflowed too much, it could destroy entire villages. That's why smart officials watched the water levels using special devices called nilometers carved in stone. They marked the highest flood level, noting it down for the records. This number helped estimate how much food the fields would produce and therefore how much tax the rural population had to give. But not everyone was willing to pay tribute when their survival depended on the line between plenty and scarcity. Fearing tax collectors and punishments for avoiding taxes, many residents took significant risks in their struggle to keep a bit more to feed their families. Chapter 3. Ancient Greece. While Egyptian farmers had their fate tied to the whims of the unpredictable river, a different tax scene was unfolding along the shores of the Aegean Sea. In the newly established Greek city-states, tax systems developed under new principles. Unlike the pharaonic centralization, each city-state set its own laws. In Athens, Sparta, and other Hellenic cities, only the wealthier citizens paid taxes, a rate based on the wealth they owned, such as houses, lands, livestock, and slaves. This Greek tax system was more fair. Instead of burdening the poor farmers like in Egypt, it exclusively taxed those who could contribute the most. With these funds, civic governments financed projects like aqueducts and temples, as well as the city's armies. The money also supported the arts and technology, contributing to the brilliance of classical culture. Thus, in the flourishing classical Athens, philosophers like Aristotle were already contemplating the role of taxes in society. According to Aristotle, the magnificent man, or the wealthiest, should generously contribute to the polis, viewing it as the path to the highest moral fulfillment. On the other hand, the less fortunate, despite their good intentions, lacked the means for such philanthropy. Even Hippocrates, the father of medicine, advocated for social responsibility. He encouraged doctors to occasionally treat patients for free and come to the aid of strangers in need. When the city required some project, be it a bridge, walls, or temples, the appeal went out to the aristocracy. They were not only asked for money, but also for their leadership to turn these projects into reality. So, in ancient Greece, life wasn't solely defined by laws and taxes. Beneath the regulatory framework, another dimension of contributing to the polis thrived, shedding light on their civic ethos. Here, the affluent played a role known as liturgos. Their responsibility wasn't just about paying taxes, but engaging in substantial projects for the common good. In return, their compensation wasn't monetary. It was the honor and prestige derived from selfless service. Hence, if they executed projects for the polis efficiently and magnificently, their social standing rose within both the elite and the broader community. Over time, liturgos attained a status previously reserved solely for heroic warriors. This civic spirit prompted many to contribute 3 or 4 times more than required, sparking philanthropic enthusiasm in others. A phenomenon distinctly distant from today's culture, where the prevailing norm often leans towards paying the minimum legally required, right? Chapter 4. Ancient Roman Empire. Now let's move a bit further in time to explore what happened in the ancient Roman Empire. After their conquests, Roman legionaries encountered sophisticated tax systems already in place. This was evident in regions like Egypt, where they adopted the approach of taxing land, livestock, and the various goods traversing through it. Virtually every commercial activity became subject to tribute. However, the tributum remained the most significant, a tax on wealth exclusively imposed on non-citizens who were obligated to pay it in full. Over time, Rome's dominion expanded from the cliffs of the ocean to the deserts in the east. It became clear that controlling such an extensive empire required straightforward yet effective methods. Thus, while they inherited the fiscal intricacies of the previous republic, the Caesars perfected a dual taxation system. On one hand, there were direct taxes on individuals, such as the tributum. On the other hand, there were indirect levies on exchanges and labor. In this manner, amidst the cultivation of wine, the trade of goods like sand, and the production of essential commodities like oil, a taxation model tailored to the considerable might of the Roman Empire thrived under the Mediterranean sun. This legacy transcended its borders, reaching into our contemporary times. And even though it's somewhat the taxation style you're familiar with, let me explain how it worked in those ancient days. Direct taxes measured wealth based on your lands and slaves. This applied to land ownership and servitude, later extending to non-citizens in annexed territories. However, caution was warranted, as both governors and procurators often demanded more than necessary for their personal gain. In this scenario, farmers were subjected to the appropriation of between a fifth and a tenth of their harvests, without mercy. So, free citizens preferred to avoid these detested levies. How did they manage? By paying indirect taxes on various transactions, tolls, inheritances, sales, legal proceedings. Every exchange carried its hidden fee, although corrupt officials cared little about overcharging. Hence, the issue of taxes in Roman society wasn't complicated, but rather prone to numerous acts of corruption. It wasn't until the Principate of Nero that he decided to make the percentages and amounts of taxes public, enabling people to report if they were not charged correctly. But when you truly ponder it, the tax collection in Roman civilization was a form of control over the territories they conquered. That's why direct taxes, affecting only the subjugated, were so despised. Meanwhile, indirect taxes kept multiplying to fill the coffers of the sprawling empire, a system that became as unpopular as it is today. However, tributes seldom sufficed. When large sums were needed, Rome turned to what it knew best: war. This way, it plundered the spoils of the defeated peoples. Since Roman citizens considered themselves above direct taxes, the administration relied primarily on hidden levies, an unjust system that favored the affluent classes. Thus, when the empire shifted to a defensive stance, it found it nearly impossible to cover its extravagant expenses. This led to a severe fiscal and economic crisis that shook the foundations of the state until it crumbled. Perhaps this was one of the potential causes of the dramatic fall of the Roman Empire. But even though that powerful empire no longer exists, today its tax payment system is still in place, even after all these years. Our exploration of the origins of taxation has been a profound journey. We began with the modest beginnings in the plains of the Tigris and Euphrates, laying the groundwork for the earliest civilizations. Eventually, we arrived at the formidable Roman Empire, which wielded its dominance across the Mediterranean through levies that allowed it to subdue numerous peoples. This journey shows us how, over the centuries, taxation has served not only to finance projects, but also to shape or dismantle cultures, a contradictory yet decisive instrument in the construction of nations. Ultimately, history reveals that communities are built on mutual contributions, a principle that endures despite the passage of time.